This is Fred Beck from Fred Beck Fighting, proudly sponsored by Empire Fight. I'm joined by George Veness and Jab Boxing. George, how you doing, mate?
How you doing, mate? I'm good. How are you?
Yeah, all good. You're in London right now. Is the weather good there?
Not really, mate. It's terrible. We've got a storm coming, no? So I hear.
What, all raining?
Windy as fuck. It's a fucking nightmare.
It's a lot. It's Jab Boxing. Obviously, you're in Jab Boxing right now. It's a lot less busy when it's raining, or is it more busy when it's raining?
I'd be honest with you. It all depends. I mean, it all depends. In the weekdays, if it's raining, people don't worry about it, right? Because they're at work, etc., and they're into their day-to-day life. It mostly depends on travels. So if the weather affects travel, then obviously it affects how many people come in. But generally, it don't, right? I mean, if you're living in England or any part of the UK, you're used to it, right? You just don't let it affect you.
Yeah, that's true. When you're from England, you kind of you're used to taking your raincoat out of you. You just kind of carrying an umbrella around of you. You know what's going on.
Yeah,
like a holiday.
Yeah, exactly. And I can't never understand when people allow the weather to affect their day-to-day life or their mood. Do you know what I mean? It's just like you live in England, mate. You know,
Something you can't control, is it? You can't control the weather. You kind of control
exactly.
But that's why, like, when I go somewhere, when I go places, I always bike, because when you're in the car or bus, you just no idea how long it's going to take. Especially when it's raining, it takes so much longer.
I'm the same. I bike everywhere, and I got into it when we opened Jab 2 years ago, just because it's not that far from me. It's like 15 minutes, and I can't believe everyone's not doing it. If you live in like central London and you ain't got to go that far, it's the best, you know.
Do you have bike locks outside the gym?
Yeah.
Okay, so you can bike. So how did you kind of get started, get into boxing? So I know you had quite a successful amateur career. How did you kind of get involved in boxing from the very start, from a young age?
I was 6 years old, so I went with my brother, who was a little bit older than me. He's about 8 years older. So my brother went, I followed him. That was how I got into it. My granddad took us, and then my dad consistently took us, and that was how I got into it. I just followed him there, you know.
How many amateur bouts do you have in the end? You started 6 years old. It's quite young.
I had about 60 fights.
That's a lot.
Yeah, sort of, a little bit. I mean, some of like Ruth and Harvey have had more than what I have. Ruth's had about 80 fights. Harvey's had about 110. I mean, once you get to a sort of senior elite level where you're going in international tournaments, they'll fight a few times in a weekend. You know what I mean? So that's when you start to rack up the bouts. But yeah, no, if your championships every year was when we done them, it was like you'd fight once a week or once every couple of weeks. Whereas now you get in these international tournaments where they're fighting, you know, every day for a few days. That's where you really start to rack up the bouts.
You won a few national titles though, didn't you, as an amateur?
Yeah, I won 4. So
of course, a lot.
Yeah, which it was okay. It was okay. It was more junior titles. So I won the schools, the Golden Gloves, it was called, which is schoolboys last year up. And then the NABCs and the junior ABAs. And you sort of was in them every year. You know, the NABCs, junior ABAs would run on the same year. Yeah, and that was how it went, which was great. You know, the gym I was at, which was Newham Boxing Club in Stratford, that was more of a junior club. So you get clubs that are more schoolboy and juniors, and they pride themselves on bringing kids, you know, from very young, not having boxed before, and turning them into schoolboy champions and junior champions, which is quite old school, if I'm honest. They wasn't really a senior club. So when I become senior, I moved out to Essex, and I started boxing for Brentwood. And then I sort of started to dwindle, go back and forth. And there's, you know, with the boxing game, you do well and it teaches you loads. It teaches you loads about yourself and about life and about discipline and about looking after yourself. And then when you're in it, and it's, you know, for me, I was doing it from 6 years old, so I'd done nothing else but boxing. And you're going down a club most days, it's hard to break that cycle. So I knew I started to lose that fighting, you know, whatever you want to call it, that fire in your stomach. But it took me a long time to admit to myself that I was losing it. Do you know what I mean? So it took me a long time to give the sport up and step away and go, right, I'm going to go on another route now. Yeah.
There was never any temptation to turn professional or anything like that then?
For me, real young age of like 14, and I won my first title at 14. From that age and going through, I did. You want to be the best, want to be world champion, etc. I never necessarily wanted to turn professional, but I wanted to go in the Olympics. I wanted to win a gold medal. That was sort of my aim, right? But as I become senior, and I was a late maturer, is what they call a late maturer, right? So I didn't feel like I had the strength, and I had a couple of losses, and I remember going training and thinking, oh, I ain't really feeling it, and carrying on from that point. But it's very hard to admit to yourself, that you don't want to do it, or to admit it to other people around you, because you've got people watching you, you've got people thinking you're good, and you could go and do something. So when I got to about 18, 19, 20, I started to feel that. About 21, I packed up. Whereas now I get splints of having a bug of thinking I could fight again. But I just directly changed my career. I started working, and I started thinking, I need to try and get on. And I started to think when I was in my very early 20s, if I could take what I've learned from boxing in terms of, being disciplined, the work ethic, focusing on a goal and achieving it, if I could take that into, the business world, I'm probably going to do all right, right? So that's been my plan ever since, and so far I'm here. So, yeah, hopefully, touch wood, it keeps going that way,
You've done really well on that kind of aspect of things. And what did you do between the time when you stopped amateur boxing and when you started jab? What happened in between that time?
When I stopped fighting, I mean, like I said, I didn't know what to do with myself. So when I went to college, I went to Frank Bruno's boxing academy, which was in Kent. So I got a letter through my door, and my mum was like, go to it. You do a personal trainer course, and it was for fighters, right? So I went there, I made the most of that. I got a personal training qualification. I was still fighting at the same time, but I was frustrated with fighting. The maturity thing is a big deal, and it happens to a lot of fighters, right? And I was frustrated with it because I remember sparring, boys that was the same age as me, because I jumped 15 kilo in one season. So I went from fighting at 54 to 69 in one season, where really I should have had a step back and gone, right, you would need to fill into that weight. But I carried on fighting. I remember fighting and not being able to match people's strength, right? So anyway, that went on, kept going. And what happened is when I was down at the boxing club, where I was used to being down there every day, I started to help out with the amateurs. So I started to take them on the pads and stayed longer and just help out on the junior nights, etc. And that was the way I went. I started to get more obsessive about the training. And I was frustrated with the way I was boxing. I was frustrated with the way my career was going. And I started to get more obsessive with what is the best way of fighting? What should I be learning? What is right? What is wrong? And I started studying more of the coaching side of it. And that was what turned me into that, basically. That was what made me go, I'm going to pack up and I'm going to focus on this. So I started training the amateurs. I started to become a trainer and a PT at the same time. And that was where my journey went. And then that led me to really delving into a coach's mindset of boxing, because it's different, right? It's different being on the boxing end and then being on the coach's end. They're two different things. One's looking from the inside and one's looking from the outside. So once my mindset flipped and I got into that, it became a second, it becomes another obsession. So it went from boxing to that. And that was where that journey in between and that transition period, which I'm very pleased I've done. I do look back and think, I wish I'd done a bit more, and I wish I went to the, but when I look back, I think, would I have gone? I don't know. Was I that good? I don't know. I admit it to myself, whereas if some people find it hard to step back and go, I didn't have that. Do you know what I mean? You look at fighters like Kevin Mitchell, me growing up, Kevin Mitchell was a bit older than me. looking at someone like Kevin Mitchell, he was an exceptional fighter from young all the way through. And that's someone who could have gone through and did. And, you know, he fought for a world title. And really, he should have won a world title. And that's someone who can make a career out of this sport. Now, we're not talking about boxing as football. Boxing's an hard game. You can't go and be a mid-level boxer and do well out of it. Do you know what I mean? You can now because of, you know, Instagram and YouTube and the views you get, etc. And Match and Boxing have done big for that, right? But you couldn't then. So that was where my mindset went.
Okay, that's quite interesting. Yeah, Kevin's a really nice guy. I had him on the channel before. He's got into that. He's now doing a lot of coaching. He's now coaching his son. He's an amateur, and he's also coaching a guy called Alfie Winter, who made his pro debut quite recently. He's probably a really good prospect. That's quite interesting when you're saying about that kind of transition bit from being a boxer to a coach. And when I went to Jab, well, I've been to Jab one time, and kind of Chris Ledger, he's been on the channel before, and he kind of showed me around, and it's quite a different box. It's quite different to a normal boxing gym. Tell me about Jab. What's so niche about it? What's so unique about it?
So I'll just give you an insight into what happened. I went from, so I was fighting, and I'd stopped fighting, and I was training the amateurs, right? And I got obsessed with it. I was, you know, I watch it every day. I watch boxing every day. And what I used to do is I used to go around to the pro gyms, and I used to train with them, right? I used to train with these top pro trainers, right? And, you know, as I was doing personal training at the same time, and I wanted to see what their thought process was, the way they taught boxing, what their philosophies was, etc. So when I started training with a guy called Gary Logan. I used to do a bit of training with him over Vauxhall. So I used to travel over from Essex to go and train with him. And I met a guy there called Luke Sweeney, who's another, you know, he's a boxing fan, and he owns a real good tailors called Tom Sweeney. You'd hear Eddie Earn talk about it quite a bit. And he about a year later, he asked me, you know, put me forward for a job in a high-end members club in Notting Hill called Bodyism. And I transitioned. So I went from training fighters to being in Essex to then going to an high-end members club and training there. And it was, listen, it was like a big step. So I went over, and, you know, I was very, very raw, right? Out of the boxing world into an high-end members club. And that was where I see what boxing would do for people, right? Because the people that's not going to walk into an old school boxing gym, they're not going to experience that authentic experience that would bring. And I was bringing that to people because I was teaching them how to box. I was teaching them the fundamentals. I was teaching them the strategy behind it. And this is to mums, you know, this is to your new, you know, office man or businessman, and people that like the sport, maybe as a spectator, or have never watched it before, but like it to keep fit and to get in shape and want to learn more about it. And when I was there, that was where I had the idea for Jab. And I met my business partner there, and I met a mentor there, and I wanted to create that in the fitness industry. I traveled around. I looked at, I went to New York, and I went to the fitness capitals of the world, and I looked at the fitness industry, and I see that you either had old rough and ready boxing gyms where most people that we was looking after and we was training are never going to walk into, right? Because it's intimidating, etc. And then you had the old school, and then you had the boxercise classes taught by PTs who have never boxed before. And I just thought, there's room for something that's authentic. So when I opened Jab, I wanted to give people, that authentic experience. So we only hire fighters, and I wanted to take them into a boxing world, basically. So, I went off the favorite eras that I love, and the 1940s, 60s, 70s. Me and my partner went into that, and we inspired Jab and inspired the brand completely off of that era, off of them eras. So people come in, they get that feel, they get that authentic feel, but they get a luxury experience, and they get to train with fighters who have been in the game their whole life, and they've experienced that, so they can get taught the right way.
Oh, okay, that's quite interesting then. And so basically, you kind of found your niche. You're a bit of in between kind of the old kind of retro gyms, and it's kind of got the new kind of box size gyms. So it doesn't, when all the mums come in, or the kind of dads in the late 50s, when they all come in, they're not intimidated by it at all. That's what you're saying. Exactly.
And I always thought to myself was, anyone can go and grab a football and play football over the park and pretend they're David Beckham, right? And have a kick about and pretend they're Ronaldo, anyone can do that. but you can't really do that in boxing. You know, it's getting more so now, but it's not really accessible to go and walk into a boxing gym and start training without them wanting you to have a fight, you know? So if I could bring people into the world of boxing and go, you know, this is what a jab is, this is what a backhand is, this is this style of fighting, this is a forward fighter, this is a back foot fighter, you know, this is how this fighter fights. And I can teach them boxing. Not for one, they're going to get in the best shape of their life, right? Because boxers are, you know, up there with the fittest athletes on the planet. Two, they're going to learn a new skill and they're going to get the benefits and feel empowered by the sport. And three, they're actually going to get into boxing. They're going to watch it. They're going to watch it on telly and understand the sport. If we can do that for the sport, that's a big deal for the client. It's a big deal. It's going to learn them a lot. But not only that, it makes the boxing industry bigger, right? So it gives it, you know, it makes it open and more accessible to people.
Yeah, certainly. That's quite a good point. Like what you're saying about how you can get people like pretending David Beckham playing football. But you don't really get that much of boxing. But the jab, how kind of the sessions work at jab? Because they're quite different to what normal box size sessions are.
So the way it works is you go. So listen, all I've done is I've broke down a normal boxing session, right? The way we would train. So you got your bag work and your ground work, right? You have 12 rounds. It's within 45 minutes because most people in cities are tight for time. So it's 12 rounds in 45 minutes. That's 3-minute rounds with 30-second rests in between. So that's intense, right? But each class is inspired off a different fighter. So for instance, when you box for England or you go on GB, or, you know, even if you're with a good trainer, that coach will go to you. The best way to get the most out of a session is to go, right, today we're going to focus on this, on working a jab. The Cubans do it a lot. Or, you know, we're going to focus on fighting at long range. So what we do is we go, right, you know, Lennox Lewis used to fight like this. He was a long range fighter. He'd use his jab to set up his backhand. You know, we're going to work on this today. So that session has a focus point and it has an aim. And you learn that skill throughout the session to get the most out of that workout. Does that make sense? And that's how it works. So it's not boxer size. I know we might have dark lights and we have music on. We're actually teaching people how to fight, right? And if people want to come out of it and go sparring, which a lot of them do, these people actually learn how to fight. And they're an intense session within 45 minutes.
And don't you have some certain sessions where you kind of base it around a certain boxer? Like I think you've done Johnny Fisher recently, where you kind of do the moves, kind of teach the moves that Johnny Fisher uses in the ring. Or I think you did Davis the other day. You kind of base the session around a certain kind of trending fighter or a fighter from like the old ages, like the 80s, 90s, that sort of thing.
Yeah, so our USP in this game is we inspire each session around a different fighter, right? So like I said, we take what that fighter did well and we inspire that whole session around him so that you learn the tricks to the trade of what that fighter did well. It's fun, right? So when I was creating jab and we was going through it, every day when I'd go to the gym, even when I was fighting, I would watch 24/7. So 24/7s, right? And I would watch, inspirational videos of Sugar Ray Leonard, Muhammad Ali, these top fighters. So when I would go to the gym, I would imitate them, and a lot of fighters do it. And I thought, that it's amazing to do that with someone who's learning boxing, who's new into boxing. So, that's our concept. We inspire every session around by a different fighter.
Yeah, certainly. I always see on your Instagram page or your Instagram stories like, okay, tomorrow when you're boxing, like, maybe learn how to box like Muhammad Ali, you're going to burn box like Mike Tyson, and you kind of introduce their kind of punch combinations, kind of their movement. And if people want to come down to jab, how do they kind of get in contact with you for PTs? How do they get in contact with you? How do they kind of get down to jab boxing?
I mean, most people are either referred by a friend or on social media, on Instagram or on our website, and find us on Google, right? And then they just give us a call or drop us an email. And that's how most people come down. Referring a friend of people, bringing people, that's become a big deal for us because our community is growing, and we pride ourselves on teaching people how to box, right? We say, and we live by these values of if we teach people how to box and we make people look good and we make people understand the sport, that proves how good we are as coaches. If we don't, then it don't. Do you know what I mean? So we pride ourselves on being able to teach people the fundamentals.
Yeah, certainly. If people want to buy any t-shirts, merchandise, caps, where can people find that? Is there a website?
Yes, it's a website, or you just drop us an email, whatever you like, and then we can send them to you.
Awesome. I'll put your website with Jab and link in the description. But George, great talking to you. I'm sure I'll come down to Jab in the near future. Thanks for the time. I'm sure we'll catch up soon then, mate. Thank you.
Lovely. Thanks, Fred. Thanks for that.